Every single one of these motors is somebody's religion. Somebody out there swears their old Mercury was the best thing ever bolted to a boat, and somebody else swears the very same motor nearly ruined their summers. So today we're doing the most dangerous thing you can do in the boating world. We're ranking every classic American outboard, worst to best. And somewhere on this list is the motor that hung off the back of your first boat. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. This is the full story, not the corporate version, the human one. But first, one honest promise, because this only works if we're fair. Every brand on this list built a gem, and every brand built a lemon. There's no motor here that somebody didn't love and somebody didn't curse. So we're not ranking on feelings alone. Every single spot comes with a reason, a real one, a known flaw, a year things went wrong, a part you can't buy anymore, reputation with the receipts. And if we put your motor somewhere you don't like, well, that's what the comments are for. And I understand why this gets people so worked up. Because a man's outboard was never just an engine to him. It was the thing that carried his kids out to the fishing hole before dawn. It was the sound of 100 summer mornings. When you spent years of your life trusting a motor to bring your family home across open water, you don't stay neutral about it. You love it, the way you love an old dog that never bit anybody. So when somebody ranks it, they're not ranking metal. They're ranking a piece of your life. I know that. I'm gonna do it anyway. Now let's start at the bottom. And the bottom belongs to a whole family of motors that were never really built to last. They were built to be cheap. Start with a bloodline most people don't even realize is one single story. West Bend, then Chrysler, then Force. It's the same budget motor, passed from owner to owner to owner across 40 years, until Mercury finally swallowed what was left. And the old mechanics don't mince words about them. They talk about the coffin cowls, the gear cases they nicknamed after the ugliest things they could think of, and their advice is blunt. Avoid the big ones. It's not that they never ran, it's that when they broke, and they broke often, you were on your own. And today the parts are drying up faster than anyone can find them. Right down there with them sits the motor from the department store, the Sears Gamefisher, the Eska, the little store brand motors your family bought, because they cost half of what a real Johnson cost, and you paid for that half price. Old-timers say those motors would rattle themselves apart. The worst of them ran on an ignition that, when it finally died, you simply cannot replace anymore, because nobody makes the part. No mechanic wants to touch one. And here's the cruelest little detail. Some of them had almost no resale value even when they still ran, because everybody already knew. They were the motor you learned on, and then the motor you were glad to be rid of. And yet, here's the strange thing. Even those get remembered with a kind of crooked love. Because for a lot of us, the cheap store brand motor was the only one the family could afford. Which means as bad as it was still the one that got us out there. It was still the one Dad clamped on the little boat so his kid could feel the water move under him for the first time. So even the worst motor on this list gave somebody a memory worth keeping. It just made them work a lot harder to keep it. And at the very rock bottom, the air-cooled ones, the motors built on a lawnmower's heart or a chainsaw's. One collector called a little Sears 3-horse basically an oversized weed whacker with a propeller on it. And that's the kindest way to say it. They were loud, they were rough, and the rule among the men who know these motors is simple and forever. Never trust an outboard that was really a lawnmower. Now, before you get too comfortable, let's climb into the middle, where things get complicated, and where I'm going to make half of you very, very angry. Because Mercury lands here, in the middle, and I already know what that's going to do to some of you. Understand, I say it with respect, because Mercury was born from a genius. Carl Kiekhaefer was a brilliant, ferocious man who built motors that could do things nobody else's could. The Tower of Power, that screaming inline six, a record run where they ran his motors 25,000 miles almost without stopping, just to prove they wouldn't die, the Black Max. These were legends, and they were real. But a ranking has to be honest, and Mercury has two scars it never quite lived down. The old salts have a nickname for what happened to a Mercury left in the ocean. They called them Alka-Seltzer motors, because in salt water, they'd corrode faster than the very anodes bolted on to protect them. They just weren't built for the salt, not at first. And the company was born out of a disaster. A first batch of motors so bad that the store that ordered 500 of them sent back nearly 400, dead. Kiekhaefer rebuilt from those ashes into greatness, and that greatness is real, but so are the scars. And that's why the mighty Mercury sits right here in the middle, glorious and flawed, and your furious comment is already writing itself. Just above the bottom, though, something gentler deserves a word. The Forgotten Innovators, Scott Atwater, champion, names most people have never heard. But here's what they don't get credit for. Back in 1949, when almost every outboard on Earth still forced you to spin the entire motor around 180 degrees just to go backwards, it was Scott Atwater who gave us forward, neutral, and reverse on a lever, something every single motor made since has copied. Champion built honest little machines with good quality parts. These weren't bad motors, they were good ones. They just belonged to small companies that couldn't build them cheap enough to survive the giants, and so they died, not for being bad, but for being small. There's a particular kind of heartbreak in that. A small company, a few good men, building something honest and well-made, and it simply wasn't enough because the giants could make theirs cheaper. Somewhere there's a family name on one of these motors, a man who poured everything he had into building a good outboard, and almost nobody today even remembers the name. But the motor still runs, and maybe that's its own kind of monument. And then there's Chrysler, sitting a notch higher than its own bloodline, and the reason is almost funny. Chrysler built its motors simple. Keep it simple, stupid. And it worked. The collectors will tell you a good early 70s Chrysler runs smooth and strong and is a joy to work on. But some of them carried a strange curse under the cowling. The department store versions used electrical guts, borrowed from an old Nash automobile, wired backwards from everything else on Earth so that a replacement starter would literally spin the wrong way. A good motor wearing a booby trap. That's Chrysler, which leaves the top. The motors the old men don't argue about, the ones they just quietly trust. And in second, the best of Mercury. Not the salt-eaten ones, the other ones. The freshwater Black Max that somebody babied, flushed, and loved. The one that started every spring for 30 years and never once let them down. When a Mercury was good and kept right, it was one of the finest motors a man could own. It's only that you had to earn it. The best Mercs went to the men who took care of them. Fair enough. That's most of us. But number one was never really in doubt, was it? You already know, because you own one, or your father did. Johnson and Evinrude, the old ones, the ones from roughly the late 70s through the mid-90s. There's a phrase the mechanics use for these motors, and once you hear it, it just sits in your chest. They say the old Johnson was made for the garage mechanic. It came apart with the same ordinary wrenches in your father's toolbox. Nothing hidden, nothing sealed away. And what that meant was simple. You could abuse one of these motors, skip the maintenance, run bad gas through it, leave it out in the weather every summer for 20 years, and it would still cough and catch and start on the third pull, like it had just been waiting for you the whole time. Fishermen who made their living on the water hung the little Johnson 99s on their boats and ran them until the numbers wore off, because they simply would not quit. That's why it's number one. Not because it was the fastest or the fanciest, but because it was the one you never had to worry about, the one that always brought you home. And think about what that word really means, brought you home. Because out on the water, a motor isn't a convenience. It's the only thing standing between your family and a very long, very frightening swim. When the weather turned mean and the waves came up and the sky went the wrong color, the man at the back of that boat needed one thing more than anything in the world. He needed the motor to run. And the old Johnson ran. Every time. It brought the kids home. It brought Dad home. It asked for so little, and it gave back the only thing that ever really mattered out there, which was everybody making it back to the dock, safe, one more time. You cannot put a number on that kind of trust, but if you tried, it would sit right here, at the top. I'll be honest about the shadow on it, because we promised honesty. Near the end, chasing the future, the company built a couple of motors that broke that sacred trust, and those very failures helped drag the whole company under. But we're not talking about those tonight. We're talking about the classic ones, the bulletproof ones, the ones still running right now on 10,000 lakes, 50 years after they were built. And that, in the end, is the thing about this whole list that gets me. Look at these names: West Bend, Scott Atwater, Champion, Chrysler, Evinrude. Every single one of these companies is gone now. Every one. The factories are closed, the men who built these motors have mostly passed on, and the brands are just words on a faded cowling. And yet the motors themselves are still here, still hanging in garages, still pushing little boats across quiet water on a summer evening. These humble machines outlived the mighty companies that built them. They outlived the men who designed them. Some of them will outlive us. So that's the list. But you already know it was never really about the specs, or the horsepower, or which one was technically best. It was about the one on the back of your boat. The one your dad started for you when your arms were still too small to pull the cord. And wherever we put it on this list, whether we crowned it or buried it, I promise you it earned a place that no ranking will ever really capture. So tell me where I got it wrong. Tell me the motor I ranked too low, because that's your motor and I want to hear about it. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it's ready.